Good afternoon. Welcome to the National Rural Health Executive Webinar Series. My name is Colleen Bay with the National Rural Health Association Services Corporation, and we appreciate your time today. Just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. Everyone will be muted during the webinar. If you have a question for the presenter, please just go ahead and type it into your control panel, and we'll make sure that it's covered at the end. We typically get through the webinars in about 45 minutes, offering some time at the end for all of those questions and time to answer. And just so that you are aware, this is a recorded event, and I'll make sure that everyone gets a copy of the link. Tomorrow you'll get an email. Today, our presenter is Tanya Friedman. Tanya has more than 25 years of full cycle recruitment experience. Considered an industry expert in nurse recruitment, she is the COO of Kinetics USA, matching internationally educated healthcare professionals to open positions in rural America. As an immigrant herself, she personally understands the difficulties of moving to a new country, and as a result has developed her own unique RELI, which stands for Relocation, Employment, Licensing, and Immigration. This program provides her clients a step-by-step process. Tanya holds a master's degree in psychology from the University of Witwatersrand, South Africa, and is a member of the National Association for Healthcare Recruitment. We would also like to take this opportunity to say a special thank you to our partner, Kinetics USA. We appreciate their support of our mission and for the industry expertise that they bring to our hospitals and clinics. The partnership with Kinetics is significant to our community in supporting our efforts on Capitol Hill, as well as allowing us to put on some of the greatest educational conferences in the rural healthcare space. With that, I will now turn it over to Tanya for our feature presentation, Is the Nursing Shortage Keeping You Up at Night? Tanya?
Thank you, Colleen. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody here today. We're very excited to present to you. I think it's an important topic for all hospitals. And before we get started, I just wanted to thank Larry Bedell and Colleen for the opportunity. We're very happy and very pleased to be a partner of the NRHA and all the good work that you do for rural hospitals. So I'm going to get straight to it. I know everybody's busy, and I want to get straight to the topic of hand. Is the nursing shortage keeping you up at night? I don't think we have to be ask too many questions to know that the overwhelming answer to this question is yes. I was actually at the conference in Kansas City last week and was speaking to many of you over the period of the summit. And of course, the overwhelming answer to this question is yes. You know, as I was sitting at the conference and listening to some of the very interesting speakers last week, I kept thinking how many issues, problems, concerns, challenges each and every one of you on this call are facing every day. Healthcare is really so tough, and rural healthcare is even more so. And I'm sure very often it feels very overwhelming. You know, to a lot of you, and very frustrating because of the limited resources that many of you have. And of course, one of the biggest challenges is the nursing shortage. So we all know the statistics. I am going to go through them very quickly. When I started doing this many years ago, we used to go in with these statistics. These days, we really don't even do that very much because it's, you know, we all know that. In the interest of time, it's often just a case of, well, let's just get straight to it and get to some of the solutions. But I think it is quite sobering and important to just go through the nurse shortage statistics so that we all on the same page. And obviously, it's a very scary picture. So to run through them, 50.9% of the RN workforce is age 50 or older. In fact, interesting enough, I was actually at one of the hospitals that we work with in upstate New York 2 weeks ago, and they were saying they have 900 nurses in their workforce, and 50% of them, this is a larger hospital though, 900 nurses in the hospital, and 500 of them are under 50. So 400 of those nurses are age 50 or older, which is really a scary picture. 1 million RNs will retire by 2030. By 2050, the number of US residents age 50 and over is projected to be 83.7 million, almost double its estimated population of 43.1 million in 2012. And this is really what many of us know is the silver tsunami. I include myself in the silver tsunami. I was born in 1964, so I am one of the baby boomers, as I know many of you are as well. And the scary thing is that according to the US Census Bureau, by 2030, there will be more older people than kids in the US, and this is the first time it's ever happened in history. Coupled with that, there's a shortage, as we know, of nursing school educators, which is restricting nursing program enrollments and graduates. I believe that the American Nurse Association said last year in 2018 that 75,000 applicants were turned away from nursing schools because they could not take them in. They didn't have enough educators. So the bottom line is that there will be more RN openings in the US than any other job. And the job growth rate for nursing is projected to be greater than any other profession through 2026. I think the hard thing that that when we think about this nursing shortage is it's not like we can even say by this time next year, this is going to change and that means that it's going to get better. No, the reality is the demographics are that it's only going to get worse. And in rural areas, the situation is even more dire. I was actually born in a small town in South Africa. As Colleen said, I was an immigrant myself. I came to this country many years ago. So rural areas are very dear to my heart. And as the United States struggles with the healthcare provider shortages, an uneven distribution of workers means that shortages are often more profound in the rural areas. I would encourage anybody who wasn't at the conference in Kansas City last week to get a copy of the slides from the American Hospital Association Regulatory Update. Erica Rogan did that update, and there's some very interesting statistics about that. But just one to point out is the rural brain drain, which is essentially only 1% of doctors in their final year of medical school want to work in a rural area. And obviously this has a severe effect in terms of the nursing shortage as well, which is all over the country. Another factor just to bring into account is that according to University of Texas in Arlington, they actually published a study. It was displayed at the NRHA in Atlanta in April earlier this week, and I'm sure you can probably ask Colleen for a copy of that as well. But some of the findings from their study was that rural residents are older, face more economic hardship, and have a higher prevalence of chronic conditions. So their findings state that rural hospitals have fewer RNs and higher patient-to-nurse ratios. And as one of our clients said to me recently, no nurses, no business. So not only is there a nursing shortage, but in rural areas, as we know, it's even more dire. In fact, if you look at the rural hospitals closing, I believe that the NRHA-sponsored study said that nearly 700 rural hospitals are at risk of closing right now. And one of the reasons for that is the nursing shortage. There are a number of reasons, but that is one of the reasons. And in fact, 113 rural hospitals have closed since 2010, according to the University of North Carolina Cecil G. Shep Center for Health Sciences Research. And I also heard in the presentation last week in Kansas City that 16 rural hospitals have closed in 2019 so far, which is outpacing the stats for previous years. So the bottom line is there's a shortage. Rural shortage is even worse. What are the implications of the shortage? The bottom line is that the American Nurse Association predicts that there'll be a 1.1 million new nurse shortage by 2022, which is around the corner throughout the US. And the distribution in rural areas, of course, is going to be much more significant. And I think for many of you on this call, the difficulty is that you're dealing with so many challenges. You kind of know the nursing shortage is there, but you just want to, you're dealing with it as best you can, but it's not always in the forefront of your mind, and hence the opportunity to do this webinar, and we're so grateful for that, to share this information. So this growing nurse shortage has a number of implications for American healthcare organizations. The first one is the recruitment of RNs is increasingly flat or on the decline, and this is something that we see from hospitals every day. There's no, well, I've been doing this for many, many years. I have no hospitals these days that will say that they have an increase in the recruitment of RNs. There's an increased usage of travelers and agency nurses, which obviously has a very high impact in terms of costs. And at the end of this webinar, Colleen will actually share a document that we got from one of our rural hospitals, and it's their figures. These are not our figures. I want to just emphasize their figures showing what they are spending on travelers and agency nurses, and I think that will be of interest to you. Another implication is concern about the skill mix. So the ratio of new to experienced nurses. As I said, I've been doing this for many, many years, and many of you on this call will also know that years ago, if we had a new grad RN, they would be encouraged to go into a med-surg unit. These days, the new grad RNs are much more demanding, I think is a fair word to say, and they want to go into specialty areas, and that's where the ratio of new to experienced nurses can be problematic in a lot of hospitals, and even more so in the rural hospitals. Obviously, we see as an implication increased nurse retention concerns, worry about RN burnout, and millennial RN turnover. Younger nurses just generally want more choices, and all of these above factors clearly impact patient care. This looming shortage has because of this looming shortage, should I say, many facilities these days are exploring internationally educated RNs as an additional tool in their toolbox to supplement their recruitment of RNs. So it's never intended to replace the current recruitment of RNs, but it can be a solution that can be of enormous benefit to healthcare leaders challenged with balancing return on investment, patient safety, as well as retention issues. There are three proposed solutions in terms of the nursing shortage. One is to try and increase the number of nurses graduating from US schools. And even though the American Nurse Association said that we only had a 3.7% enrollment increase in 2018, there are a number of organizations that are looking at this as a strategy to try and work towards overcoming the nursing shortage. One of our hospitals in Missouri was telling us that they were working with their nursing schools in their area, and they have actually doubled the intake of new grad nurses. So it is possible, and this is one of the proposed solutions. Another is in order to decrease the nurse dropout and turnover by improving working conditions, pay, and hours. And I know, speaking to many of you at the various NRHA conferences over the last year, many of you are working on this as one of your strategic goals. We saw just at the conference there were a lot of tools and solutions being proposed. I know, telehealth, visiting specialists. There was a NRHA case study on engaged leadership by one of our colleagues, Bill Oxier, that I think would be of interest to a lot of you. And I know a lot of you are working on this as one of the solutions to overcome the nursing shortage. The third solution is the increased recruitment of internationally educated nurses, especially from countries of surplus. So there is an alliance of ethical international recruitment companies, and this is a non-profit organization that look at bilateral agreements where the recruitment of nurses will only ever be from a country of surplus. Colleen was going to do some polls for us, and I think, Colleen, if you want to do the first poll now, is to look at what percentage of internationally educated nurses, or how many internationally educated nurses do you have at your facility?
Yep, I went ahead and put that poll up if everyone can just participate, and then I will share the results with everyone.
Okay, perfect. So I think that's interesting statistics. Many of you might have been involved in international recruitment many years ago, and right now the statistics are that 15% of nurses in the US are internationally educated, and we anticipate that this will grow significantly over the years, because it obviously is one of the solutions to the nursing shortage. And many organizations these days are actually looking at a three-prong approach. So looking at increasing the number of new grads, also looking at tools to decrease nurse dropout, as well as increasing the recruitment of international nursing.
Okay, Tanya, I went ahead and closed it, and I'm going to go ahead and read the results for everyone. 63% have none, 38% have 1 to 10%. So
Okay.
that's pretty interesting.
Okay, yeah, so interesting polls, and kind of fits into that 15% model. But interesting enough that the anticipation is that number of, it's a numbers game. So the number of internationally educated nurses is certainly going to be growing. That is what everybody can expect from this scenario. And as we said, it's really a pure numbers game. So let's talk a little bit more about this specific solution. What is international recruitment? I think the first thing to say before we get into the nuts and bolts of it is that international recruitment is not a magic wand. I wish it was. I've been doing this for many, many years, and it's not an easy process. It is a complicated process. There are a lot of government regulations from a licensing and an immigration perspective. There's a lot of tools that are needed in order to onboard international nurses. So it's certainly not an easy process, and I would tell anybody from the get-go to anticipate that it's not a magic wand. However, it can be a great additional tool in your toolbox, which can supplement your current recruitment of American nurses. It's never intended to take away from your recruitment of your current recruitment trends right now, but it can be a great supplement. So there are a number of steps. The first one is finding qualified RN candidates from other countries in the world, and that is obviously to fill the gap. The key word in that sentence is qualified RNs, and I'm going to go through with you in a short while just some of the ways that we look at qualifying candidates for international recruitment. But if you think about it, it's kind of like if you're doing international recruitment yourself, or if you're using a company to help you do that, it's kind of like a matchmaker process. And we in fact call ourselves career matchmakers, because it's a matter of finding the right match. The second point is obviously finding a facility in the US that wants to hire them, and there are more and more facilities coming on board every single day to do this. In fact, the one thing that I can tell you that even in the last year to 18 months, we've seen a significant change in the number of organizations coming in to do international recruitment, and it's becoming increasingly competitive. Getting the nurses certified and licensed to practice in the US is the next part of international recruitment, and I have a number of slides that I'm going to discuss with you in more detail how that works. Getting them the required visas is another slide I'm going to go into more detail with, and then getting them to the facility and retaining them is the last pointer on the slide, which I will be discussing that onboarding in a lot more detail as well. So that's just kind of an overview of what international recruitment entails. In terms of the benefits of international recruitment, there are a number of these. So the first one is that you're pretty much looking at a holistic match. International recruitment is not transactional recruitment. I know for many of you on this call, you might be doing, whoops, my slide went ahead of itself. Oh goodness. Let me just go backwards. Sorry. Sorry, 1 second. Oh my goodness. There we go. Okay, so the benefits is number one is a holistic match. This is not transactional recruitment. You really are looking at the holistic match. In fact, it drills down to a lot of detail. For instance, if we are looking at nurses going to a rural hospital, we want to make sure that we look at, oh goodness, and I'm not sure how to keep it on the slide, Colleen. I don't know if you have any help or suggestions to me, but so for instance, in terms of if we're looking at a holistic match, we want to make sure that we have a oh my goodness, I don't know how to hold this.
There might be a pause button if the 3 little dots. See if there's a pause button in there.
Oh, thank you. That's very helpful. Okay, thank you. Okay, perfect. You can see this is live, so we thank you for your patience with that. So on the holistic match, we really want to drill down and we want to look at making sure that we look at a holistic match. International recruitment is really a true partnership where we're looking at, for instance, if the nurses want to go to a rural area, if they're going to be okay in a rural, they are interested in that kind of location. If they are, in a lot of rural areas, they have to drive. We don't want to recruit anybody who's not able to drive. So there are a lot of things that we need to take into account in order to make sure that the nurses are going to be the right match and the right fit. The benefits of international recruitment are also that you can recruit top talent worldwide. So it's not just the best person who responds to your ad, it really can be the best person. Because you have a much broader pool to work from. And as the pool of nurses decreases over the coming years, I think this is going to be more and more important to be able to recruit the top talent. So in terms of international recruitment, you are always going to be recruiting experienced nurses in the specific with the specific units or skill sets that you are looking for. One thing also to mention with international nurses is they come into the process highly engaged. And that is because for many international nurses, for instance, if you think of like from the Philippines, they only earn a few $100s a month. And just to take their NCLEX, to take their English exam, to get a visa screen certificate, which I'll explain to you what that is, all of those things are extremely costly. So you must remember that international nurses not only come in with experience, with qualifications, but also with the right attitude, highly engaged. International nurses can be a great retention tool. We have one of our hospitals that we work with. It's a large hospital system, and I know many of you on the call are not, as rural hospitals, you're not large systems, but I think this is interesting statistics. We have recruited over 400 nurses for them, and they have a 96% retention rate after 3 years with their international nurses. The reason is because a lot of international nurses come in highly engaged, but also after 3 years, pretty much they are putting down roots. They are, the kids are in school, the spouses may be working, they might have bought a house in the area, and that is where you're going to get that great retention. International nursing can be a phenomenal recruitment tool, and obviously there's a lot of cost savings on the retention side. It also can provide excellent return on investment. And Colleen, here I thought maybe you wanted to do the second poll, which is looking at the amount of spend that many of you have on travelers or agency per year. So I think if you want to go ahead and do that poll for Colleen, she will let us know the results. But the important thing with international nursing, and this is what you can see from the handout that Colleen will be sharing with you, it comes from one of our clients. It's their figures, and they basically look at the cost savings of international nurses as opposed to using travelers and agency nurses. There's enormous cost, even though there is a cost, there are enormous cost savings. So we have a lot of success stories that we can share with you in that regard. Another benefit of international recruitment is creating an online pipeline, an ongoing pipeline of experienced RNs to supplement your current recruitment. And that is where we have some facilities where we recruit 4 nurses. We have some facilities where we recruit 400 nurses. But the way to think of international nurses is that it would be an ongoing pipeline. So you might have one nurse, if they're coming from Canada, coming in 3 months, one coming in 6 months, one coming in a year, one might be coming in 18 months. But you've got that constant trickle of nurses coming through, and that can relieve a lot of headaches when you know that the nursing shortage is, you're experiencing it, and you also know it's only going to get worse. So it's really
Okay.
about preparation.
Sorry to interrupt. I just threw out the results, and I know you can't see it. We have 20% at $0, 20% up to 50,000, 20% at 50 to 100,000, and 40% at 100,000 to 250,000.
Wow. Okay. So interesting, very interesting figures coming out. I think we don't even have to look at the specific numbers to know that using travelers and agency nurses is going to become increasingly expensive. And in fact, just to share with you, we were actually approached by some of the travel companies recently, large travel companies, to help them to recruit international nurses. So just to throw in just an interesting tidbit of information in that regard, because even the travel companies know that as the pie is going to be shrinking, they are going to have to think outside the box and start looking at international nurses as part of their pipeline and their strategic plan. So thank you for the results of that poll, Colleen. Again, the benefits are strategic long-term planning tool. And as I said, it's important to think of it. I think the word pipeline is a good word to kind of keep in your mind. International recruitment is not a short-term fix. It's not a quick fix. So you have to have that as part of your strategic long-term planning. But the benefit is a stable workforce with a solid skills ratio. Because international nurses are experienced nurses, you're going to be able to really impact that nurse-patient ratio between new grads and experienced nurses, which is key for for ensuring that we don't have nurse burnout and nurse turnover. We might want to do the third poll, actually, Colleen, which was looking at the rate of turnover.
Yep. I just want to look it up there.
To see what your current nurse turnover is at the moment.
So I'll read it for people who have just called in. Between retirement and new graduation dropout, nurse turnover is increasing. What is your rate of turnover?
So that's the third poll looking at staff turnover. And we know that the staff turnover is only going to increase as there are fewer nurses coming into the market. The demographics of aging patients, aging population, people getting older, people getting sicker, needing more care, and not enough people to look after them. There's going to be more burnout, there's going to be more turnover, and obviously there are associated costs with that. The ultimate bottom line is all the above factors in terms of the benefits of international nurse recruitment will enhance patient safety, patient care and safety. And that really, I think, just in terms of where we are right now in the presentation, is why, from a personal perspective, I just love the international recruitment, because it's not just about changing lives, where you're changing the lives of the nurses and their families, making a new life in the US, but also changing the lives of the patients, those that need the care, and that will now have enough care to, enough people to look after them.
Sorry. The results are up. I have, there was 0% I don't knows and 0% zeros. 50% of our attendees said 5 to 10% was their rate of turnover, and then 50% said 25% was their rate of turnover.
Okay. And we know, as we've said, that as the nursing shortage increases, the turnover is, if nothing changes, if you're not doing any of those proposed solutions, it's only going to increase. So international recruitment really is, one of the solutions. It's a multi-pronged approach, but one of the solutions. And we're now going to move to how it works. How do we get started on this? One of my clients actually said to me, it's kind of like another language. And I'm going to run through this with you, though, to help you understand how the nurse immigration, licensing, recruitment, selection, and onboarding practices work for international international nurses. So the process of bringing an international RN to the US can seem overwhelming and complicated, and it is. There's no way around that. As I said before, this is not a magic wand. It's not a quick fix. I wish it was. And that's where if you are going to be doing it on your own, or if you're going to be working with a company to help you with this process, it's really important to educate yourself about the process, because there are a lot of moving parts. So it's important to break this process down into a step-by-step approach and identify the key elements. If you kind of think about it, there are like 4 main umbrellas. And the first is the licensing and the credentialing. I'm going to go through that in detail. The second is the immigration. The third is recruitment and selection process. And the fourth is successful onboarding best practices. The first one, in terms of licensing and credentialing, registered nurses need to meet if they're coming from outside the country, they need to meet the US credentialing requirements. So the first thing, of course, is that they need to have passed the NCLEX exam. If you are working with a recruitment company that specializes in international recruitment, from our side, so specifically, we will never present anybody who has not already passed the NCLEX exam. They will also need to pass the IELTS or the TOEFL exam, and that is specifically, oh goodness, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. That is specifically the English exam. So if the nurse was not trained in English, they have to pass an English exam, either the TOEFL or the IELTS, in order to come to the US. And that can also give you peace of mind that the nurse has the language skills in order to work in the US, because I know that's one of the things that is very worrying for many of you that might be on this call. The third part of the licensing credentialing is a document called the Visa Screen Certificate. The Visa Screen Certificate is a document that comes from an organization in Philadelphia. It's a nonprofit called the CGFNS. The CGFNS is a government organization that will evaluate the transcripts of the nurses and make sure that the education is equivalent to an American nurse. In fact, most nurses' education is actually higher. Most international nurses actually have a bachelor's degree, but this in itself can give you peace of mind that any nurse coming through to the US will have to go through a visa screen certification process from the CGFNS in order to work in the US. In fact, the CGFNS actually has an alliance for ethical recruitment, and just for you to know, Kinetics USA is a certified by the CGFNS for ethical recruitment practices. The other piece of licensing and credentialing is that the nurse would have to have an endorsement to the specific state where you're going to be working in. There are certain states that international nurses cannot write or take the NCLEX through. The reason for that is because of Social Security. And so there are only certain states that nurses can actually take the NCLEX through, namely states like Illinois, Texas, New York, Northern Marianas, and many states they cannot actually write the NCLEX through because they don't have Social Security yet, because they don't yet have a green card. However, they can, once they've taken the NCLEX, get the license endorsement, if required, to that specific state once they have that Social Security number and they have the visa. Moving on to the next pillar or an umbrella is the immigration for RNs. So here there's a lot of misconceptions, and a lot of people don't really understand how the immigration work, and I'm going to run through that with you. The first part of the immigration side is that there really are only 2 ways that an RN can work in the US. The first is if they are a Canadian citizen, they would come through on the TN visa, which is a non-immigrant status in the US. This is only for citizens of Canada and Mexico, and it offers expedited work authorization to the citizens of these countries. The TN visa costs $50. It's very quick if the nurse have all the licenses in order to work in the US, and it's probably the simplest of the visas. I've been doing this for many years. I can count on one hand the amount of nurses that have come through Mexico. Most of the nurses that come on the TN visas come through Canada. And of course, this is an area, this is a location that many hospitals in the US look at to recruit nurses from Canada because it is a simpler visa. However, I just want to make sure everybody knows that it is extremely competitive recruiting from Canada as well these days. Only in January 2015 did the Canadians start writing the NCLEX exam. So that means that the pool of Canadians that are available to work in the US, unless they go out of their way to write the NCLEX at their own cost after the time that they've already graduated, the pool of nurses in Canada is still relatively small, and that's why it's really competitive. The other way that nurses can come into the US is on a green card or permanent residency, and this refers to the immigration process of becoming a lawful permanent resident. There are two types of green cards. There's a consular green card, and that is if the nurse is outside the country, and there's an adjustment of status green card, and that if the nurse is inside the country. For instance, if they're here on a student visa or a visitor's visa, or maybe as a dependent for their spouse is an H1 or something like that. There is a lot of misconception on the immigration side in terms of visas. So sometimes people will think that nurses are going to be coming through on an H1 visa, but pretty much, and an H1 visa, for those of you who don't know, is a work visa. This is a non-immigrant visa. And the H1 actually is not really applicable for RNs. The reason being is that you really will only use that visa for a nurse manager or a nurse practitioner. Nurses are Schedule A, which means they are occupations of short supply, and that is why they will go straight to a green card. They in fact go to what's called an EB3 green card, which is an employment-based green card. And there is a cap of 140,000 of those per year. Each country gets 7% of that cap. So the green card is dependent on your country of birth. So just to sum up, there are two ways that a registered nurse can come into the US. One is on the TN, if they are a Canadian citizen or Mexican citizen. The second is if they are a green card, they can come in on a green card. And the H1 is really not applicable for international nurses. In terms of the recruitment and selection process, there is a step-by-step best practices roadmap that we can probably suggest to you. So to run through that, the first is the selection process. Profiles of nurses who have passed the NCLEX are presented to the facility based on site visits and white paper analysis. So that is the way that we do the process. In terms of the white paper analysis, what that is from our side is because we're looking at a holistic match on the international nurse side, we want to make sure that we ask a lot of questions of our hospitals. We want to know, about the facility. What is it that specifically that you're looking for? Do nurses have to drive? Is it a cold climate? There's a lot of questions that we ask on that side so that we can make sure that we have a holistic match. Because as we said, this is not transactional recruitment. You really are looking at a match, not just on the clinical skills, but to the person as a whole and how they're going to fit into that organization. The second part is the interview process, and there are different ways of doing the interview process with international nurses. Obviously, we can use the phone. We have some organizations that will do interviews via Skype. Some will do video interviews using Zoom or Botum, and then we have some clients that will do recruitment trips. When I started doing this many years ago, we used to mainly do recruitment trips that were arranged between the facility and the nurse candidate. These days, it's more unusual because the technology is obviously helping us to bridge that gap. But that being said, we do have clients that will do the trips. In fact, we were actually in the UAE last month. We were with a hospital that recruited 155 nurses. It was mainly Filipino nurses in the UAE, and so that is one of the ways that we can still actually facilitate the interviews. The the third step is after the interview by the candidate and upon selection, it would be important to complete the immigration process, the licensing process, the pre-arrival counseling, and the post-arrival support. International recruitment can be deceptively simple. You know, you can kind of think, well, you know, we have a nurse, we have a facility, put it together, and that's kind of how it works. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as that, and there are a lot of tools and methodologies that are needed in order to facilitate the complex process of the immigration process, the licensing, as well as the pre-arrival and post-arrival onboarding support. The fourth step of the selection and recruitment and selection process is ongoing follow-up. And that's where it's important to set the nurses up for success, and to there are a lot of tools and methodologies that we have in that regard in order to facilitate that process. So the fourth pillar, or the fourth umbrella, is successful onboarding best practices. That is where international RNs will be the facilities employees. The way that we do recruitment at Kinetics is we direct hire, which means that the facilities will employ the nurses themselves and sponsor them. There's no divide. There's no like agency nurses and staff nurses. There are other models of international recruitment, but that is the model that we that we utilize. And the reason why we do that, just personally from our side, is I was an immigrant myself. I came to this country many years ago, and we just feel that that is really setting the nurses up for success as well as the facilities by not having that divide. So on the onboarding best practices, the facility should offer a relocation package for the RNs. There are various tools, methodologies, and techniques that can be implemented to promote nurse engagement and retention. And it's important to have a successful onboarding and training program is recommended to make sure that the nurses are onboarded in the correct way. And we definitely strongly suggest that software is used in order to monitor the delivery of the nurses. That's certainly how we work in our organization. So I see we are almost at the 45 minutes. So just a quick sum up before we finish up, just a little bit about who are Kinetics. As you know, we are a selected NRHA partner, and we're very proud of that and very proud of the work that we do to help the rural hospitals. We are a premier specialist for providing internationally educated healthcare professionals for direct hire. So we specialize in direct hire to facilities throughout the US. We work with acute care hospitals, surgery centers, skilled nursing, rehab, correctional facilities. We know this business. We've been doing it for a long time. We brought through thousands of nurses to the US. We call ourselves career matchmakers in that we partner for long-term success. This is not transactional recruitment. This is a true partnership with both the facilities and the RNs to ensure a holistic match. And we have a team of people, licensing, immigration, onboarding specialists, etc., that help us to navigate that process. We have developed over the years, I always say through painful trial and error, several proprietary high-touch tools and methodologies to help the nurses make a smooth transition to the US. And we emphasize their high touch. Because I was an immigrant myself, and many of the founders of Kinetics are immigrants, we believe in a high touch approach from our side, because it can be a process that is very frustrating and stressful from both the hospital and with the nurses. So we have a lot of tools and methodologies that we've developed over the years to help to make that transition as smooth as possible. Just for you to know, we recruit top talent worldwide. So we have a pipeline of 22,000 experienced qualified RNs from Canada, Philippines. We have a team in the Philippines, UK, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. I'm originally from South Africa many years ago. Nepal, Middle East, India, to fulfill your critical needs. And I think it's important for you to know we are certified by CGFNS for ethical recruitment practices. There is a slide here with some of our testimonials. I would encourage you to check out our nurse reviews on our Kinetics Facebook page if you are interested. We take a lot of care with our nurses. Every nurse is important to us, and we are in the process of actually developing a lot of new tools to help the nurses even more so in terms of communication, updating, and keeping them on track throughout this complicated journey to get to the US. So, you know, that's just a little bit about Kinetics. I think the last thing just to share with you is if you are going to be looking at international nurses as a potential solution as you are addressing the nursing shortage, the question really to ask is not what, you know, if you're looking at a company, is not what they can offer, but rather what they can deliver. This process is really about success stories. As I said before, it's not an easy process, and it's very important that when you are going through this journey, if you decide to embark on it, that you make sure to do your homework, educate yourself about that, and we certainly will be open to any of your questions in that regard. Before we get to questions, just to let you know, the Kinetics website is being redone. So you're welcome to look at that, but our Kinetics website is being done, and the new one will be up probably in about 4 to 6 weeks. Okay, and we're right on 45 minutes, Colleen.
You are. And I do have a bunch of questions, so I'm glad that we saved some time for this.
Okay.
The first question that I have is, what is the difference between a direct hire international nurse company and a staffing international nurse company?
Okay. That's a good question, and thank you for whoever asked that question. So there is a difference, and it's important, as I said, to educate yourself in that regard, and there are pros and cons of each approach. So on the staffing company model is where the staffing company hires and sponsors the nurses for the green card, and then they will outsource those nurses to the facility. The direct hire, which is what we do at Kinetics USA, is where the hospital themselves will sponsor and will employ the registered nurse. And Kinetics, as a direct hire agency, will help both the hospital and the nurse navigate that process. One of our clients calls us, he says he thinks of us as a consultant. So that is kind of the difference, and there are pros and cons for either kinds of models. The pros of the staffing model is that it'll be quicker. It's quicker for you to get the nurses, and because they will sponsor the nurses, they create their own pipeline, and as the nurse is almost coming to the consulate to get their green card, then they will introduce them to any partner hospitals that they work with, and the nurses will come and work, you know, with you at your facility. So it's a much quicker, it's a quicker process from the hospital's perspective. You know, it's the same process from the nurse's perspective, but from the hospital's perspective, it is quicker. That's the pro of the staffing model. The con of the staffing model is it's much more expensive. And that is where that handout might give you some additional information that Colleen's going to share with you at the end of the webinar. But on the direct hire side, we do that model, you know, for a number of reasons. The one is that it's much more cost efficient for a hospital, even though there is a cost, there's a tremendous cost saving. The other reason why we do the direct hire model is because, as I said, many of the founders of the company were immigrants ourselves. We know personally how hard this process is, and we feel that from the nurse's perspective, if they are employed and sponsored directly by the employer, that creates a great trust and relationship right from the get-go. From the hospital's side, you're not going to have that divide. You're not going to have the agency nurses and the and your own hires, your own employees. So it just creates it. We just feel that it creates more of a better culture, but there are, you know, pros and cons of either. The con of the direct hire side is that it takes a long time. So it's not a quick fix. and it is very much a part of an ongoing strategic plan that you would need to look at. And the key word, as I said, is pipeline. So that kind of is a sum up of the difference between a staffing company and a direct hire, and each one have got their pros and cons. It depends what you're looking for, which is going to be the best fit. Were there any
Okay, I think,
questions, Colleen?
yeah, I have a whole bunch more. That one kind of brings me to the next one. How long does the process take?
So it depends on the country. It depends which visa the nurse is going to come through, and it depends on the licensing, on where they are in the licensing process. So if we take on the immigration side, we said that there is the TN process for a Canadian citizen. And then there's the green card side if the nurse was born in any other country other than Canada, or is a citizen of any other country other than Canada. And in terms of the timing, the quickest is going to be the TN. The TN can take anywhere from around a month to about 9 months. And the reason why there is such a big window is because of a number of different things. It depends on if the nurses have already passed the English exam, if they needed to do that, if they have already have a visa screen, if they need to get an endorsement to a specific state. So that it's taking into account a lot of that licensing, the stuff under the licensing umbrella. On the green card side, if the person was born in any country other than India, Philippines, and China, it's pretty much around like 11, 12 months for an EB3 green card to come in. For someone born in the Philippines, you're looking at 12 to probably around 14 months. And this changes all the time because a new visa bulletin comes out every month. And so these estimates are really estimates. It can change month by month depending on the visa bulletin. But if the person was born in China or India, those are the longest time frames. And in our case, we will not work with any nurses that were born in China or India unless they had what's called a previous petition, which is unless they were sponsored previously by another petitioner and have a place in the visa bulletin already, which is kind of like an expedited process. So the sum up is for Canadian anywhere from a month to around 9 months, and that's an estimate. And for an EB3 green card, it's around a year.
Thanks. Next question is, what is the retention rate of international nurses?
So the retention rate of international nurses can be really high. There's a lot of things that can go wrong with international nurses, and that's where I would encourage anybody on this call, if you're thinking of doing international recruitment, make sure, as I've said a few times now, educate yourself, not just about the process, but also about if you're going to do it yourself or if you're going to be working with a partner agency to help you with that. In our experience, because we've been doing it for a long time, we have very high retention rates. We have a lot of tools and methodologies that we implement to maintain that. We create Facebook groups, we do Facebook Live sessions, we have buddy systems, we have ambassador programs, we have a program called, it's our own proprietary system called our Rely program, where we put them into a learning center. There's just a lot of things that can be done to improve the retention, but generally speaking, the retention for international nurses is really high, and that's really where there's an enormous cost saving, because you're not going to have that staff turnover. International nurses also come in, as I said, highly engaged, very motivated. They really want to be there.
Okay, next question is, can a nurse switch from a TN, non-immigrant visa, to a green card process, immigrant visa?
Yes, the answer is yes. And I'm pleased that you raised that question, because that's something that we are hearing from a lot of the clients that we work with, is that sometimes they'll recruit a Canadian nurse, and the nurse comes through on the TN visa, and then maybe when the nurse has been there for a few months, they really like it, that they like the nurse likes them, and they decide that they want to put down roots. It is possible to have to do a green card. You cannot do a green card right away. So for instance, you can't have a nurse come through on a TN visa and right away do a green card. That would be termed what we call dual intent. and you cannot have dual intent when you are sponsoring a nurse. But if they've been there for, you know, a few months, 6 months, a year, whatever it is, you can definitely do an EB3 green card. And that can also be, just to add to your question about retention, a great retention tool, because it's typical for Canadian nurses to come through on a TN visa and to have, even though the TN is actually for 3 years, it's typical in the industry that nurses coming through on a TN will come through for a 2-year commitment. They can also renew that indefinitely. And it's typical for nurses on a 3-year coming through on a green card will come through on a 3-year commitment, a minimum of a 3-year commitment, should I say. I mean, hopefully they'll come and stay forever, but a minimum of a 3-year commitment. So if the nurse, just go back to your question about the TN to green card, if the nurse comes on a TN, they would be, you know, signing on for a 2-year commitment. If after 6 months or so they say, you know, I really like it here and I really want to put down roots, and they want you to do a green card petition for them, you can always add on an extra year to their commitment, and that's again where you see that great retention.
Okay. Can you sponsor a nurse if they are studying in the USA on a student visa? If so, what does that process entail?
Yes, so you definitely can. We have many of our clients do that. There are a lot of nurses that are doing their bachelor's or, you know, even their associates and even their masters, where they are international nurses and looking for a petition. That means that they are here on an F1 student visa. And you can sponsor them for an EB3 green card. Typically, that would be what we call an adjustment of status green card. You will remember I spoke about that on one of the slides. And that is when the nurse is inside the country. Also, in some programs, the nurses would also get an OPT, which is where they can work unrestricted for 1 year, actually without a visa, after they've completed their nursing education. So we have many clients that make use of that kind of nurse. We have lots of those nurses in our database where they are trained in the US and are going to be looking for a green card. And that's where you can also, you know, get them to, because it's a green card, you will be looking at them signing a minimum of a 3-year commitment. So yes, that is possible. And we do that every day.
Okay, I've got another one.
Okay.
What type of things would be included in the relocation package?
So the relocation package could have a number of different components. From our side as a direct hire employer, because the nurses are going to be your, you know, I can't speak for how the staffing companies work, but as if you're looking at it from a direct hire recruitment model, the relocation package can have a number of different components. So it might be things like paying for a one-way air ticket for the nurse to come to the US. It could be giving the nurse like initial housing. Some of the facilities we work with will give like a month of free housing when the nurses arrive. Some will give up to 3 months of free housing. It just depends on your budget and how you want to structure that. Some facilities will pay for the green card. Some get the nurses to pay a portion of that. Some facilities will reimburse for some of the licensing costs, like the visa screen or the English exam, or even for nurses doing the NCLEX endorsement. So it depends on the hospital how you want to structure that package. But if you kind of think of it like in the same way is if you have maybe like a staff nurse or a manager that you are relocating from, say, Ohio to California, in the same way as you might have for a US applicant a relocation package. It's the same kind of concept. It's just that here you might have additional components. And typically that you would also, sorry, Colleen, I think you have one more question, but typically you will also include, you can include what's called a forgivable loan. So for instance, if you spent X amount of dollars on the one-way air ticket, the green card, the 1 month of free housing, paying for maybe for their visa screen or their English exam or something like that, and you have a package, you can include that lump sum into the nurse contract. And that is where it's kind of like a forgivable loan, and that is where they would be liable to pay that back on a prorated basis should they leave before the 2 or the 3 year commitment period is up. And that's, the same kind of concept, as I said, as like a relocation package, even for an American nurse. The nurses take that very seriously, by the way, because it's linked to immigration. They don't take that lightly at all. And that's also where you get great retention.
How do we integrate nurses into our workforce?
So that's a big question. Again, there are a number of tools and methodologies that we suggest from our side to integrate the nurses, and that includes tools and methodologies that we utilize for the nurses to help them acculturize, but also for the staff in the hospitals as well to help them and educate them on the differences. For instance, one of our clients in Missouri last week, we've recruited, hundreds of nurses for them over the last few years, and they had last week a diversity day where they had a panel of international nurses sharing their stories. They did training on, for their existing staff on, how to accommodate nurses into the US facilities, especially during that initial transition time when they arrive in the US and before they get acclimatized. So there are a lot of tools and methodologies that we can suggest, and if anybody's interested, I'd be happy to speak to them after the call and go through some of those in more detail.
Okay, I have a couple more. So should we just go ahead and dive in and get those done with? I know we're a little bit over, but I'm okay with that.
Sure, I'm excited that there's so many questions.
Great.
Happy to answer as many as we can. I know it's a complicated topic, but it's an important topic. So if everybody's okay to give us more time on the call, I'm happy to go through those.
Okay, and like I said, this is recorded, so everyone will get a link to the recording tomorrow. Can a nurse have multiple TN visas?
Yes, the answer is yes, they can. And we have that, we have that often. So for instance, a nurse can work at facility A on a TN visa, and they can work at facility B that is maybe, in another part of town on a separate TN visa. And that's perfectly legal, and the only thing is that the nurse needs to cross the border twice to get that stamped into their passport. But you can actually even have a full-time TN and a part-time TN going simultaneously. The TN is actually really the simplest visa.
The visa screen process, how long does it take to obtain a visa screen? And can you tell us more about the English exam requirement for the visa screen?
Sure. So the visa screen process, again, just to remind everybody, it goes under that licensing umbrella. This is the document that comes from the CGFNS, the organization, a nonprofit organization, government organization in Philadelphia, that will evaluate the transcripts of the nurse. If the nurse was not trained in English, they have to pass the English exam in order to get the visa screen. It takes about 2 months from the time that the nurse has sent through all of their documents for the nurse to be able to get the visa screen certificate. So it is a lengthy process. It is time consuming. And from our side, as a direct hire employer, we have a team of people that's all they do, is help the nurses through the licensing hoops and hurdles, because there's a lot of detail. Sometimes it's the school closed down, or we had one recently in India where the school burnt down and there weren't records. So, just that piece of it can be very time consuming. But typically I would say on average around 8 weeks is the time frame from when a nurse, when they've submitted all their documents, to the time they'll actually get that visa screen certificate. And it costs $540. So if you think that a nurse in the Philippines is only earning a few $100s a month, it just gives you an idea of how engaged and motivated these nurses are to come to the US, because it's really expensive for them. I mean, they have no choice but to go through these processes, and they do. And that's where, again, as I said, they come in highly engaged, because they're not just, it's not just talk, they really are putting their money where their mouth is.
Great. I have one more.
Okay.
What is the credentialing process to evaluate educational equivalency?
So that's a very specific question. So that one is a process that's done when the nurse goes through the green card. If for instance, you're doing a consulate green card, the USCIS, which is the government organization that will administer the steps of the green card, will require for an educational equivalency. And I think from a hospital perspective, the thing for you to, for everybody on the call and for those that might be listening to the recorded call, is to know that there are a lot of checks and balances that have been put into the place to make sure that the nurses have equivalent education to an American nurse, both on the licensing and the immigration side. So that tool is something that we need to complete on the immigration side. It's under the immigration umbrella, and again is kind of like a second check and balance in the system to make sure the nurses have are qualified and do have the education that's required by our hospitals.
Okay, well, that concludes all the questions that I have. Thank you again to Tanya and Kinetics for this very insightful presentation, and thank you to all of our attendees for the wonderful questions and for your time today. Tanya mentioned a cost analysis worksheet that another one of our National Rural Health Association hospitals has actually created, and immediately following this presentation, you'll get a survey. So if you're interested in receiving that, all you have to do is say yes, give me the white paper, and I will go ahead and email it to you as well. So I hope everyone found this to be very insightful as I did. Thanks again to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks again for the opportunity. And if anybody has any additional questions, feel free to reach out to us. As Colleen said, we are a partner of the NRHA, and we're very happy to help in any way we can, just to share information.
Thanks so much, Tanya.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.